At a tea dinner, my parents sneered, "How does it feel being the most useless one here?" Everyone laughed. I replied, "How does it feel knowing this useless one won't be paying your bills anymore?" The moment my words landed, the drama stunned everyone. How does it feel to be trapped in a gilded cage, sacrificing your entire life and hard-earned success, only to be deemed useless by the very people you're supporting? That night, at a high-end restaurant, with their sneers and laughter echoing in my ears, I finally broke. The words that tumbled out next weren't a question, but a declaration that would irrevocably shatter my world. How does it feel knowing this useless one won't be paying your bills anymore? The lavish restaurant gleamed under a soft, golden light, the clinking of silverware a deceptive soundtrack to the tension building inside me. My perfectly pressed dress felt like a cage, and the air, thick with expensive perfume, suddenly seemed to choke me. It was a stark contrast to the small, suffocating home where I, Olivia, grew up, where every day felt like walking on eggshells. My parents, David and Brenda, had a knack for making me feel inadequate, no matter what I achieved. Straight A's. My father, David, would squint at my report card and ask why I wasn't involved in more extracurriculars, like normal kids. Winning the regional science fair in 8th grade. My mother, Brenda, would just sigh, lamenting that I hadn't put as much effort into my appearance. This pattern of belittlement stalked my childhood. My accomplishments were minimized, my flaws magnified and paraded for all to see. Family gatherings were their favorite stage for the disappointment show, starring their daughter, Olivia. Despite their emotional drought, I thrived academically. I was desperate to prove my worth, though their bar always remained impossibly high. A full scholarship to a prestigious university for computer science. My father dismissed it as luck, claiming anyone could get into college these days. My mother, meanwhile, wondered aloud why I hadn't chosen a more suitable career for a woman. College became my escape. Away from their relentless criticism, I flourished. I graduated at the top of my class, multiple tech companies vying for me. I landed a position at TechSphere, a rapidly growing software company, quickly establishing myself as indispensable. By 25, I'd been promoted twice, leading my own development team. My financial success arrived swiftly, bringing an unexpected burden with it. 6 months into my career, David lost his job. Brenda called me in tears, claiming they might lose their house. Without a second thought, I offered to help temporarily. Temporarily quickly morphed into permanently. Soon, I wasn't just covering their mortgage, but their car payments, utility bills, and even weekly groceries. Nearly 40% of my income vanished into their lives each month. Gratitude? Never. They acted as if it was my inherent obligation. "After all we did raising you," Brenda would often say, "it's the least you could do." The fact that I'd cooked my own meals since 12 and put myself through college on scholarship seemed to be conveniently forgotten details. My financial contributions did nothing to quell their emotional abuse. If anything, it intensified. Our weekly phone calls became torture. Brenda would probe my love life, expressing concern that I'd end up alone with all those computers. David would grill me about my savings, implying I should be earning more by now. Each conversation left me hollow, drained, and worthless. My therapist, Dr. Hayes, had gently nudged me for months about setting boundaries. "Your relationship with them is fundamentally unbalanced," she'd say. "You are giving everything and receiving emotional harm in return." I knew she was right, but confronting them paralyzed me. I was conditioned to seek their approval, and the thought of disappointing them further felt unbearable. Months bled into years, my resentment growing alongside my career. I bought my own condominium, a modern one-bedroom in a great neighborhood, while still funding their 3-bedroom suburban home. I drove a modest used car, while financing David's new SUV. I budgeted meticulously for myself, while Brenda shopped freely with my allowance. The emotional toll became crushing. Panic attacks flared before family gatherings. I started making excuses to skip Sunday dinners, only to be bombarded with guilt-tripping texts and calls. "I guess your family isn't important enough for you anymore," Brenda would lament. "Now that you have your fancy job, you're too good for us," David would add. The tension had been escalating for weeks leading up to that fateful dinner. My younger sister, Chloe, announced her engagement, and my parents immediately volunteered to host an extravagant party, fully expecting me to foot the bill. When I cautiously suggested a more modest celebration, Brenda accused me of being jealous. David called me selfish and reminded me that I owed them for all they had sacrificed. The breaking point was hurtling toward me faster than I realized. Years of suppressed feelings were bubbling, one more push would make everything overflow. The monthly family dinner was a tradition I had reluctantly established and funded for 3 years. Every first Friday, I'd reserve a table at a nice restaurant, and my entire family would gather for fine dining at my expense. These dinners cost me hundreds, but I justified it as the price of maintaining family harmony. This particular Friday in April, I had reserved a table at La Lumière, an upscale French restaurant downtown. The occasion was ostensibly a celebration of my recent promotion to Senior Development Manager, though I suspected my family was more interested in the expensive menu than my career milestone. The guest list included David and Brenda, Chloe and her fiancé, Liam, my brother Daniel, his wife, Emily, and Aunt Carol, who never missed an opportunity for a free meal. I arrived early, as usual, to ensure everything was perfect. The hostess led me to our reserved table, a round booth under an elegant chandelier. Sitting alone, waiting, the familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I checked my watch repeatedly, knowing they'd be at least 15 minutes late, as always. The anticipation of their criticism made my hands tremble slightly. I took deep, steadying breaths. David and Brenda arrived first, 20 minutes late. Brenda air-kissed my cheek without actual contact, while David merely nodded. They immediately ordered the most expensive drinks without so much as a hello. Brenda complained about the parking, implying I should have chosen a place with valet. David scrutinized the menu prices with raised eyebrows, despite knowing I'd be covering the entire bill. "You look tired," Brenda commented, her standard greeting regardless of how I actually looked. I was wearing a new dress bought specifically for the occasion, and had spent extra time on my hair and makeup. "Are they working you too hard at that company? Your skin is breaking out." "I'm fine, Mom," I replied, resisting the urge to self-consciously touch my face. "Just busy with the new position." David grunted. "They probably promoted you because they need more women in management. Companies do that nowadays for their image." Before I could respond, the rest of the family arrived in a noisy cluster. Chloe immediately commanded attention, flashing her engagement ring dramatically. Daniel looked uncomfortable, as he often did at these gatherings, while Emily smiled politely. Aunt Carol made a beeline for the wine list. Once everyone was seated and drinks were ordered, Brenda took control of the conversation, as always. She launched into an elaborate description of Chloe's wedding plans. Though the engagement was barely a month old, I noticed with a sinking feeling that the plan sounded exorbitant, and I knew I'd be expected to contribute significantly. "We're thinking a minimum of 200 guests," Brenda announced. "And the Riverfront Gardens venue would be perfect, wouldn't it, Olivia?" She looked at me pointedly. The Riverfront Gardens was one of the most expensive wedding venues in the city. I nodded noncommittally, but Brenda took this as agreement. "Wonderful. I'll put down the deposit next week. They require $10,000 to hold the date, $10,000. The amount hung in the air. Everyone at the table knew who would be providing that money. "That seems like a lot for a deposit," I said carefully. "Well, quality costs money," Brenda replied dismissively. "Not everything can be cheap like your apartment." My one-bedroom condominium had cost me $350,000 in the competitive city market, but I let the comment slide, as I always did. The conversation continued in this vein throughout the appetizers. David complained about needing a new golf club membership. Aunt Carol mentioned her upcoming European vacation, looking at me expectantly. Chloe talked endlessly about wedding details, each more expensive than the last. By the time our main courses arrived, I was incredibly tense. No one had asked about my promotion, or shown any interest in my accomplishments. Instead, the conversation revolved entirely around what everyone needed or wanted, with the unspoken understanding that I would provide it. "So, Olivia," David said suddenly, his voice carrying across the table. "I heard your company is having layoffs. Should you really be spending money on dinners like this?" The table fell silent. My company was not having layoffs. In fact, we were expanding rapidly. My promotion came with a significant raise and equity package. There are no layoffs, I said quietly. The company is doing very well. That's not what I read online, David insisted. Tech companies are struggling. You should be saving your money. The irony of this statement, coming from a man whose lifestyle I largely funded, was apparently lost on him. David's right, Brenda chimed in. You need to be more careful with money. You're not getting any younger, and no man wants a woman who can't manage her finances. My face burned. I manage my finances very well, I said, my voice strained. Really? David scoffed. Then why are you still in that tiny apartment? Everyone else your age has a real house by now. Everyone else my age isn't paying for 2 households. I wanted to scream, but I bit my tongue. Chloe seized the opportunity to talk about the house she and Liam planned to buy after the wedding. We're looking at the Oak Ridge neighborhood, she said. The houses there start around $600,000. Lovely area, Brenda approved. Olivia, maybe you could help them with the down payment as a wedding gift. 20% would be what, $120,000. That would be so generous of you. The audacity of this suggestion left me momentarily speechless. I was already expected to pay for the wedding, and now a house down payment too. The tension at the table was building, something shifting inside me. Years of suppressed feelings were threatening to surface. I took a sip of water, trying to remain calm. Actually, I've been thinking about buying a house myself. Maybe in Oak Ridge, too. The silence was deafening. My family exchanged glances, clearly disturbed by the idea that I might spend my money on myself for once. Don't be ridiculous, David finally said. You don't need a house. What would you do with all that space? It would be wasted on you. Besides, Brenda added, you need to focus on helping Chloe right now. Her future is just beginning. And what about my future? I asked, surprising myself with the question. David laughed, a short, dismissive sound that cut through me like a knife. He looked around the table, encouraging others to join his amusement at my expense. Your future. Come on, Olivia. Let's be realistic here. And then came the words that would change everything. Leaning forward with a sneer, he asked, loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, how does it feel being the most useless one here? Everyone laughed. Brenda, Chloe, Aunt Carol, even Daniel gave an uncomfortable chuckle. Only Emily, Daniel's wife, remained silent, looking down at her plate. In that moment, something inside me broke. Or perhaps, something was finally fixed. The weight of years of emotional abuse and financial exploitation suddenly became unbearable. I couldn't carry it anymore. The laughter around the table stretched into an eternity as I sat there, my face burning with humiliation and a surging anger. In that suspended moment, memories flashed, the countless times I'd been belittled, the sacrifices I'd made, the money I'd given them, the emotional abuse I'd endured in hopes of earning a love that never came. I looked at David's smug expression, Brenda's amused smile, Chloe's gleeful face, and something crystallized within me. Clarity and fierce resolve replaced my usual anxiety. Without planning to, without the careful filtering I typically applied to every word I spoke to them, I responded, how does it feel knowing this useless one won't be paying your bills anymore? The laughter stopped abruptly. 5 shocked faces stared back as my words hung in the air. David's expression shifted from amusement to confusion, then to outright anger. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice low but intense. Exactly what I said, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I am done. No more mortgage payments, no more car loans, no more utility bills, no more credit card payments. No more funding your lifestyle while you treat me like garbage. Brenda's face paled. Olivia, you can't be serious. You're just being sensitive, as usual. I have never been more serious in my life, I said. For years, I've given you everything I could, financially and emotionally. And what have I gotten in return? Criticism, mockery, and disrespect. After everything we've done for you, David began, his face reddening, this is how you repay us. By making a scene in public. What exactly have you done for me? I asked, genuinely curious about what he believed his contributions had been. Did you pay for my education? No, I earned scholarships. Did you support my career choices? No, you belittled them. Did you even provide emotional support? No, you tore down every accomplishment. We gave you life, my mother. Brenda interjected, hypocritically. We raised you, fed you, clothed you. The bare minimum required by law, I noted, and I've been repaying that basic parental obligation 100-fold for years now. David's strategy shifted from anger to intimidation, his specialty. You won't cut us off, he said with cold certainty. You wouldn't dare. Watch me, I replied, pulling out my phone. In fact, let me show you how serious I am. I opened my banking app, and with a few taps, canceled the automatic payment scheduled to go to their mortgage company the following Monday. There. That's the last mortgage payment you will ever receive from me. Brenda gasped. Olivia, that payment is due next week. How will we pay it? The same way other adults do, I said. With your own money, from your own jobs. You know your father hasn't been able to find suitable work, Brenda protested. He hasn't been looking, I corrected her. Why would he, when he has me as his personal ATM? Chloe, seeing the flow of easy money potentially drying up right before her expensive wedding, decided to intervene. Olivia, you're being cruel. Mom and Dad have always supported you. And what about my wedding? You promised. I never promised to pay for your wedding, I said calmly. That was decided for me, not by me. Just like everything else. Daniel, who had remained silent until now, surprisingly spoke up. She has a point, you know. Olivia has been supporting everyone for years, and no one ever thanks her. Instead, you all just demand more. I looked at Daniel with a surge of surprise and gratitude. It was the first time he had ever defended me against our parents. David turned his anger toward Daniel. Stay out of this. This is between us and your sister. No, Daniel said firmly. This involves all of us, and the way we've been taking advantage of Olivia. Brenda, seeing her control of the situation slipping, resorted to her most effective tactic, tears. Her eyes welled up on command, and she dabbed at them delicately with her napkin. I can't believe my own daughter would do this to us. After all the sacrifices we made. What sacrifices, Mom? I asked. Name one significant sacrifice you've made for me in the last 10 years. She couldn't answer, instead turning to Aunt Carol for support. Carol, can you believe how she's speaking to us? Aunt Carol, who had been quietly calculating how this development might affect her own financial interests, chose her words carefully. Perhaps we should all calm down and discuss this privately, not in a restaurant. There is nothing to discuss, I said. I have made my decision. I will not be financially supporting any of you anymore. David slammed his hand on the table, causing the glasses to jump and several nearby diners to turn and stare. You listen to me, young lady. You have obligations to this family. You cannot just walk away. Actually, I can, I said, gathering my purse and standing up. I have no legal obligation to support capable adults who choose not to support themselves. My only obligation was a moral one, based on the mistaken belief that you actually loved and valued me. That illusion is now gone. If you walk out that door, David threatened, don't expect to be welcomed back into this family. I looked around the table at the faces of my family. People who had taken everything and given nothing. Who had mocked and belittled me, even as they cashed my checks. That's not the threat you think it is, I said quietly. Being excluded from this toxic dynamic sounds more like a reward than a punishment. With those words, I walked away from the table, feeling both terrified and strangely liberated. As I passed the hostess stand, I paused to pay for the meals that had already been served and apologized for the disturbance. Then I stepped out into the cool evening air, took a deep breath, and felt, for the first time in years, the weight beginning to lift from my shoulders. Driving home, my emotions cycled rapidly between elation at finally standing up for myself, fear about the repercussions, and deep sadness for the loving family I had always wanted, but never had. My phone began buzzing incessantly with texts and calls, but I ignored them all. Tonight was for me to begin processing what had just happened and what it meant for my future. The moment I stepped into my condominium, my phone exploded with notifications, 15 missed calls, 28 text messages, and 3 voicemails, all from family members. I silenced my phone and placed it face down on the counter, needing space to process. My hands were shaking as I poured myself a glass of water. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was subsiding, leaving me drained, but strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, I had spoken my truth without filtering it through the lens of what my family wanted to hear. The texts had started arriving before I even left the restaurant parking lot. I finally gathered the courage to read them. From Brenda, "How could you embarrass us like this? Call me immediately." From David, "You are making a huge mistake. We need to talk now." From Chloe, "You are ruining everything. What about my wedding?" From Aunt Carol, "Your behavior was shocking. Your poor mother is in tears." Only 2 messages offered any support. From Daniel, "Are you okay? I think you did the right thing." From Emily, "Proud of you for standing up for yourself. Let me know if you need anything." I decided not to respond to any of them that night. Instead, I ran a hot bath, something I rarely had time to do, and allowed myself to simply exist without the constant pressure of family obligations. The next morning, I called Dr. Hayes and scheduled an emergency therapy session for that afternoon. When I arrived at her office, the familiar calm environment helped settle my frayed nerves. "You stood up to your family," she said after I recounted the previous night's events. It was a statement, not a question. "I did," I confirmed. "And I feel both terrible and relieved." "Both reactions are completely normal," she assured me. "You have disrupted a long-established dynamic that is bound to feel uncomfortable, even when it's the right thing to do." We spent the session exploring my feelings of guilt and examining the beliefs that had kept me trapped in the cycle of financial exploitation. Dr. Hayes helped me see that my parents had conditioned me to feel responsible for their well-being, reversing the natural parent-child relationship. "What you did took immense courage," she told me. "Now comes the harder part, maintaining your boundaries despite the pressure they will inevitably apply." Her words proved prophetic. By Monday morning, David and Brenda had escalated their attempts to regain control. David showed up at my workplace unannounced, creating a scene in the lobby until security escorted him out. Brenda left tearful voicemails about how they would lose their house without my help. Chloe sent a detailed breakdown of wedding expenses with payment deadlines highlighted, as if our conversation had never happened. The most shocking escalation came on Wednesday when my parents contacted my emergency contact at work, my colleague and friend Sarah, claiming there was a family emergency, and they needed to reach me immediately. When Sarah called me into her office to relay the message, I broke down and told her everything. "That's financial abuse," she said bluntly. "And emotional abuse, too, Olivia. No wonder you've been so stressed. You've been carrying an entire family on your back." Having someone outside the situation validate my experience was incredibly powerful. Sarah shared that her own mother had been financially controlling, though in a different way, and she had also had to establish firm boundaries. "The guilt never completely goes away," she admitted, "but it gets easier to recognize it as a programmed response that you don't have to act on." Armed with support from my therapist and now Sarah, I felt stronger. When I finally decided to assess the financial damage of years of supporting my family, I met with a financial advisor, Michael Chen, who helped me create a comprehensive picture of my situation. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 4 years, I had given David and Brenda more than $200,000. This included their mortgage payments, car loans, credit card bills, and loans that were never repaid. Additionally, I had spent approximately $50,000 on family dinners, holidays, and gifts. If I had invested that money instead, Michael calculated I would have had enough for a substantial down payment on a house in any neighborhood I desired, plus a healthy retirement fund. "The good news," Michael said, "is that you are still young and your income is excellent. Now that you are not supporting multiple households, you can quickly rebuild your savings." We created a new financial plan focused on my goals rather than my family's demands. For the first time, I allowed myself to envision a future based on my own dreams, a comfortable home of my own, travel experiences I had always postponed, and eventually, true financial independence. 2 weeks after the restaurant confrontation, I received an unexpected piece of mail. It was a bank statement for a credit card I didn't recognize, showing a balance of $22,000. Upon closer inspection, I realized with horror that it was a credit card in my name, but I had never applied for it or used it. I immediately called the credit card company and discovered that the card had been opened 3 years ago with my social security number and personal information. The address on the account was my parents' house. The customer service representative informed me that regular payments had been made until recently when 2 payments had been missed. The revelation that my parents had committed identity theft left me reeling. I pulled my credit report and found 2 additional credit cards and a personal loan, all in my name, but clearly used by my parents. The total fraudulent debt exceeded $45,000. With shaking hands, I called my lawyer, Ethan Hayes, who specialized in both family and financial law. He confirmed what I suspected: my parents' actions constituted identity theft and fraud, serious crimes that could result in criminal charges. You have 2 options, Ethan explained. You can file a police report, which would likely lead to criminal charges against your parents, or you can handle it civilly by disputing the fraudulent accounts with documentation that you did not authorize them. The decision weighed heavily on me. Despite everything, the thought of my parents facing criminal charges was difficult to bear. After careful consideration, I chose to dispute the accounts without filing police charges, on the condition that my parents sign a legally binding agreement to repay the legitimate debts they had incurred. Armed with this evidence and Ethan's legal counsel, I arranged to meet David and Brenda at a neutral location, a conference room at Ethan's office. When they arrived, their expressions shifted from self-righteous anger to visible discomfort upon seeing my lawyer present. "What is this about?" David demanded. "Why did you bring a lawyer?" Without preamble, I placed the credit reports and account statements on the table between us. "This is about identity theft and fraud," I said calmly. "These accounts were opened in my name without my knowledge or consent." The color drained from Brenda's face. David attempted his usual blustering denial, but the evidence was irrefutable. "You have 2 choices," I informed them, following Ethan's guidance. "Either sign this agreement to repay the $45,000 in fraudulent debt, or I file a police report for identity theft." "You would send your own parents to jail?" Brenda gasped. "You have the option to make this right without criminal charges," I stated. After hours of negotiation, during which my parents cycled through denial, anger, and eventually desperate bargaining, they signed the repayment agreement. The terms were strict: monthly payments directly to the creditors with their house as collateral. If they missed even 1 payment, I would proceed with criminal charges. As they left the office, defeated and sullen, I felt no joy in my victory, only sadness for what our relationship had become and anger at their betrayal. Yet, beneath those feelings was a growing sense of empowerment. I was finally taking control of my life and protecting myself from those who had exploited me for years. That evening, I received an unexpected text from Chloe. "Can we talk privately?" "No, Mom and Dad." Cautiously, I agreed to meet her for coffee the next day. When we met, I was surprised to find a very different Chloe than the entitled bride-to-be from the dinner. She looked tired and subdued. "I had no idea," she began. "About the credit cards, the loans, everything they were doing to you. Would it have mattered?" I asked honestly. She looked down at her coffee. "I don't know. Maybe not before, but it does now." She paused. "They've been telling everyone that you abandoned the family, that you're selfish and cruel. But Daniel told me what really happened. And then I found some of the paperwork for those credit cards while looking for something in Dad's office." For the first time, my sister was seeing David and Brenda clearly, without the filter of favoritism that had protected her all these years. It was a painful awakening. "I'm postponing the wedding," she continued. "Liam and I are going to save up ourselves, do something smaller. It's not right to expect you to pay for everything, especially after what they did." Her words were the first genuine acknowledgement from any family member of how unfairly I had been treated. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was a start. My brother Daniel called later that week, expressing similar realizations. "I always knew they favored Chloe and treated you differently," he admitted. "But I had no idea about the financial stuff. Emily has been telling me for years that something wasn't right about how they expected you to support them, but I didn't want to see it." These conversations with my siblings were bittersweet. On one hand, it was validating to have them finally recognize the abuse I had endured. On the other hand, it highlighted how long they had been willing to benefit from my exploitation without questioning it. As the weeks passed, the full extent of the fallout from my decision became apparent. David and Brenda, desperate to maintain their lifestyle without my financial support, began spreading increasingly malicious lies about me to extended family and their social circle. According to them, I had suffered some kind of mental breakdown, had fallen under the influence of bad people at work, or was selfishly hoarding money while they faced destitution. Most painfully, they told my grandmother, who lived in another state and with whom I had always been close, that I had cut them off without reason, and refused to speak to them, despite their loving attempts to reconcile. When my grandmother called me, concerned and confused, I had to gently explain the reality of the situation, including the identity theft. Her shock and subsequent anger toward my parents was yet another painful ripple effect of their actions. I always thought David was too controlling with money, she told me. But I never imagined he would steal from his own daughter. Your grandfather would be appalled. The family divide deepened when relatives began taking sides. David's brothers rallied around him, leaving unpleasant messages about family loyalty and duty. Brenda's younger sister, who had always been more independent than my mother, reached out to offer support. Your mother has always been jealous of anyone who can stand on their own 2 feet, she confided. She resented me for starting my own business instead of relying on a husband or children. I'm not surprised she resents your success, too. This insight into Brenda's psychology was illuminating but did little to ease the pain of her betrayal. I had always believed that beneath her criticism was love and pride in my accomplishments. Now I had to face the possibility that her feelings toward me were far more complicated, and perhaps darker, than I had allowed myself to see. The financial revelations continued as I worked with Ethan and Michael to untangle the web of exploitation. Beyond the fraudulent accounts in my name, I discovered that my parents had been using my financial information in other ways. They had listed me as a guarantor on their home equity line of credit without my knowledge. They had used my address for tax purposes to claim certain deductions. They had even attempted to access my retirement accounts by claiming to be me over the phone, though thankfully the financial institution's security measures had prevented this. Each discovery felt like a fresh betrayal, reopening wounds I was trying desperately to heal. Dr. Hayes helped me process these revelations, not as new injuries, but as confirmation that I had made the right decision to protect myself. They are showing you exactly who they are, she said during one particularly difficult session after I learned about the home equity line. Believe them. My meeting with Michael took on new urgency as we worked to secure my financial information and prevent further fraud. We froze my credit, changed all my accounts and passwords, and set up monitoring services to alert me to any suspicious activity. Unfortunately, this kind of financial abuse within families is more common than people realize, Michael told me. The betrayal of trust makes it particularly devastating. We calculated that in addition to the more than $200,000 I had knowingly given my parents, they had fraudulently obtained or committed me to approximately $70,000 in additional obligations. The total impact on my financial health approached $300,000, not counting the lost opportunity cost of investments I could have made. Despite this staggering sum, Michael assured me that my situation was far from hopeless. You have an excellent income, and now that you are not supporting multiple households, you can rebuild quickly. Within 2 years, you could be in a better financial position than most people your age. This perspective helped me focus on the future rather than dwelling on what had been taken from me. I committed to a strict financial recovery plan, cutting unnecessary expenses and maximizing my retirement contributions. For the first time, I was saving and investing for myself, not to create a safety net for others. 3 months after the confrontation at the restaurant, I received an email from David. The subject line read, "Reconciliation," but the content revealed a very different purpose. After a brief and obviously insincere apology, if I felt hurt by anything they might have done, the email got to its real point. They were facing foreclosure on their house and needed my help one last time. The old me would have immediately responded with an offer of assistance, sacrificing my own financial health to rescue them yet again. The new me, strengthened by therapy and supported by genuine friends, recognized the manipulation for what it was. I forwarded the email to Ethan, my lawyer, who confirmed that under our agreement, my parents were required to sell their house to pay off the fraudulent debts before facing foreclosure. They are trying to circumvent the legal agreement, Ethan explained. If they contact you again about financial matters, direct them to me. I sent a brief, factual response referring them to the signed agreement and Ethan's contact information. Within hours, Brenda called, crying hysterically about becoming homeless. When I calmly reiterated that they needed to speak with my lawyer, her tears dried up instantly, replaced by cold fury. "You always were a selfish child," she hissed. "After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us. By sicking lawyers on your own parents." "I am enforcing an agreement you signed after committing fraud in my name," I replied, surprised by my own steadiness. "That is not selfish. It is self-preservation." "We are your parents," she shouted, as if this relationship entitled them to commit crimes against me without consequences. "Yes, you are," I acknowledged. "And that makes your betrayal even worse." I ended the call and immediately contacted Dr. Hayes, who helped me work through the renewed guilt and doubt Brenda's call had triggered. "They are using the parent card as a weapon," she observed. "But being parents gave them responsibilities toward you, not unlimited rights to exploit you." Meanwhile, Daniel revealed that David and Brenda had been pressuring him to talk sense into me and convince me to help them keep their house. They had also approached Chloe with the same request, suggesting that if she could persuade me to rescue them financially, they would help with her wedding after all. "They are trying to use us against each other," Daniel said disgustedly. "They haven't changed at all." The most surprising development came when Liam, Chloe's fiancé, contacted me directly. We had never been particularly close, but he wanted to meet for coffee to discuss something important. When we met, he seemed nervous but determined. "I need to tell you something about your parents," he began. "Last year, before Chloe and I were engaged, your father approached me with a proposition. He suggested that if I married Chloe, the family would benefit financially because you would pay for everything." I stared at him, stunned by this revelation. "What?" Liam nodded uncomfortably. "He implied that marrying into your family was a good move because you were the cash cow who would ensure everyone was taken care of." I was horrified, but Chloe assured me it wasn't like that you were just generous with family. The calculated nature of David's thinking, the way he had viewed me not as a daughter but as a resource to be exploited, and even used as a bargaining chip in others' relationships, left me speechless. "I wanted you to know," Liam continued, "because Chloe and I are trying to build an honest relationship, and keeping this secret felt wrong. Plus, after what they did with those credit cards." He shook his head. "You deserve to know the truth." This conversation with Liam was the final piece of evidence I needed to fully accept that my relationship with my parents had never been what I pretended it was. They had not seen me as a daughter to love and support, but as a useful tool to exploit for their own benefit. That night, I wrote a letter that I never intended to send, pouring out years of hurt, disappointment, and anger. The act of putting these feelings into words was cathartic, allowing me to acknowledge the depth of my pain without directing it at anyone. When I finished, I felt lighter, as if I had finally put down a burden I had been carrying for decades. 6 months after the confrontation at the restaurant, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. Free from the financial burden of supporting David and Brenda, and the emotional burden of seeking their approval, I discovered spaces within myself for new growth and connections. My therapy sessions with Dr. Hayes shifted from crisis management to deeper healing work. We explored the childhood patterns that had shaped my people-pleasing tendencies and worked on developing a stronger sense of self-worth that wasn't tied to external validation or productivity. "You are inherently valuable," Dr. Hayes would remind me, "not because of what you provide to others, but simply because you exist." This concept was revolutionary to someone who had been raised to believe my worth was measured by my usefulness to others. Gradually, I began to internalize this new perspective, making decisions based on my own needs and desires rather than anticipating what others expected of me. One of the most significant changes was the development of a genuine support system outside my family. Sarah, my colleague, who had supported me during the initial crisis, became a close friend. We began meeting weekly for coffee, sharing our experiences with difficult family dynamics and celebrating our small victories in establishing healthier patterns. I also joined a support group for adult children of emotionally abusive parents, where I found community with others who truly understood my experiences. The validation and shared wisdom of this group accelerated my healing in ways individual therapy alone could not have accomplished. The hardest part for me was accepting that I couldn't change them, shared one group member whose story resonated deeply with mine. Once I stopped trying to earn their love and focused on loving myself, everything shifted. As my inner circle transformed, so did my living situation. With my new financial freedom, I decided to sell my condominium and purchase a small house in a neighborhood I loved. The process of creating a home that reflected my taste and priorities became a physical manifestation of my emotional journey. I painted the walls colors I had always admired, but Brenda would have criticized as too bold. I arranged furniture for comfort and function rather than appearance. I planted a garden in the small backyard, finding unexpected peace in nurturing growing things. David and Brenda, meanwhile, were forced to downsize significantly after selling their house to comply with our legal agreement. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment, and for the first time in decades, David began actively looking for employment. According to Daniel, who maintained limited contact with them, the transition was difficult and frequently blamed on me. Dad complains constantly about having to work at his age, Daniel reported after a brief visit to their new apartment. Mom keeps saying they wouldn't be in this situation if their daughter had not abandoned them. Though these reports still stung, the pain was duller now, more a sad acknowledgement of what could never be than an acute wound. I maintained my boundaries, firmly redirecting any direct contact about financial matters to Ethan and limiting other communication to brief, factual exchanges when necessary. As the months passed, my parents made several attempts at reconciliation, though their definition of making amends never included genuine accountability for their actions or behaviors. Each attempt followed a predictable pattern: initial warmth and vague apologies, followed by subtle hints about their financial difficulties, culminating in direct requests for assistance when the earlier approaches failed. Dr. Hayes helped me recognize these patterns and respond appropriately, acknowledging any genuine effort at connection while firmly maintaining my boundaries around financial support. They need to experience the natural consequences of their actions, she reminded me. That is how real change happens, if it's going to happen at all. The approaching holiday season presented a new challenge. Thanksgiving had always been spent at my parents' house, with me providing the food and often the cooking, while enduring criticism about everything from the moistness of the turkey to my personal life choices. This year would be different. After careful consideration, I declined their invitation, which had come with guilt-inducing references to possibly our last Thanksgiving in this apartment if things don't improve. Instead, I accepted Sarah's invitation to join her family celebration. The contrast was illuminating. Sarah's family welcomed me warmly, engaged me in genuine conversation, expressed interest in my life without judgment, and thanked me sincerely for the pie I had contributed. There were no backhanded compliments, no thinly veiled criticisms, no tensions simmering beneath forced politeness. Is it always like this? I asked Sarah quietly as we helped clean up after dinner. Like what? She asked, genuinely confused. So pleasant. So free of drama and guilt. Sarah laughed, then grew serious when she realized I wasn't joking. Not every family gathering is perfect, but yes, generally it is like this. This is what family is supposed to feel like, Olivia. Her words stayed with me long after the holiday. This is what family is supposed to feel like. Not an obligation or a source of stress, but a genuine source of support and belonging. As Christmas approached, I made another significant decision. Rather than participating in the usual family gift exchange, which had always involved me giving expensive presents and receiving token items in return, I decided to redirect my holiday budget. I made donations to organizations supporting victims of financial abuse and children from disadvantaged backgrounds, causes that had become personally meaningful to me. I also created new traditions for myself, attending a holiday concert with Sarah and her husband, volunteering at a community dinner, and hosting a small gathering for friends on Christmas Eve. Daniel and Emily joined us, bringing a homemade dish and simple, thoughtful gifts. Chloe and Liam stopped by briefly, still navigating their own complicated feelings about our family dynamics. They had postponed their wedding indefinitely, choosing instead to save for a house and build their relationship on a more solid foundation before making that commitment. Your standing up to Mom and Dad made me realize I was rushing into marriage partly because it was what they expected, Chloe confided as we shared a quiet moment in the kitchen. I'm trying to figure out what I actually want, not what will please them or solve their problems. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. An unexpected gift, more valuable than any wrapped present. The new year brought another surprising development. I received a job offer from a competing tech company with a significant salary increase and more leadership responsibility. In the past, I would have declined immediately, worried about how a job change would affect my ability to support my family. Now, I was free to consider the opportunity based solely on my own career goals and interests. After careful consideration and consultation with trusted mentors, I accepted the position. The transition reinvigorated my professional life, challenging me in new ways and connecting me with colleagues who valued my contributions. Within months, I was leading a major project that showcased my technical and leadership skills, earning recognition I would once have dismissed as undeserved. My financial situation improved rapidly as well. Without the drain of supporting multiple households, my savings grew quickly. Michael, my financial advisor, helped me develop a comprehensive plan that included retirement savings, investments, and funds for personal goals like travel and continued education. "You are on track to achieve financial independence well ahead of schedule," he noted at our 6-month review meeting. "The difference in your trajectory is remarkable." The most profound changes, however, were internal. I began to recognize and challenge the critical inner voice that had always echoed my parents' judgments. I practiced self-compassion when I made mistakes instead of berating myself. I learned to identify my own preferences and desires rather than automatically deferring to others. These shifts manifested in surprising ways. I discovered I actually enjoyed public speaking, something I had avoided because David had once mocked a presentation I gave in high school. I found I preferred bold colors and patterns in my clothing despite Brenda's lifelong insistence that I should wear slimming neutrals. I realized I loved cooking elaborate meals when it was by choice rather than obligation. Small discoveries perhaps, but they represented a fundamental reclamation of self that had been suppressed for decades under the weight of others' expectations and judgments. 1 year after the confrontation at the restaurant, I could look back and see not just what I had lost, but what I had gained. The journey had been painful, the costs real. Family relationships had been irreparably altered. Illusions of parental love shattered, financial resources lost. Yet from those losses had emerged a stronger, more authentic self, capable of creating boundaries, recognizing genuine connection, and building a life aligned with my own values rather than others' demands. Exactly 1 year after the dinner that changed everything, I sat in my garden reflecting on the journey. The spring flowers were blooming, a visual reminder of growth and renewal after a difficult winter. My new home, a modest but charming 2-bedroom house with a yard, represented more than just a physical space. It was a sanctuary I had created for myself, free from the influence and expectations of others. My relationship with David and Brenda had settled into a carefully structured pattern. After months of attempted manipulation and several cycles of argument and superficial reconciliation, we had established what my therapist called structured contact. We communicated primarily through email, with occasional brief phone calls for specific purposes. Our interactions were civil but distant, focused on practical matters rather than emotional connection. David had found part-time work as a consultant, though he frequently complained about the indignity of having to work at his age. Brenda had taken a position at a local boutique, her first job in decades. They continued to live in their apartment, having finally accepted that their previous lifestyle, funded by my income, was no longer available to them. The legal agreement regarding the fraudulent accounts had been fulfilled, with the sale of their house covering most of the debts. I had absorbed some losses, but Michael assured me that my financial recovery was well ahead of schedule. My new job had come with equity options that were already showing promising returns, and my savings had grown substantially without the drain of supporting multiple households. More important than the financial resolution was the emotional freedom I had gained. Dr. Hayes and I had worked through layers of conditioned guilt and obligation, developing new patterns of thought that allowed me to prioritize my own well-being without the crushing weight of shame that had once accompanied any act of self-care. "The most significant change I see in you," Dr. Hayes observed during a recent session, "is your ability to distinguish between genuine responsibility and imposed obligation. You can now recognize when someone is attempting to manipulate you through guilt or family loyalty." This new discernment had allowed me to maintain healthier relationships with my siblings, who had undergone their own reckonings with our family dynamics. Daniel and Emily had become regular parts of my life, joining me for dinner every few weeks and sharing honest conversations about our upbringing and its effects. Chloe and I had developed a more tentative but increasingly authentic connection. After postponing her wedding, she had entered therapy herself, beginning to recognize how our parents' favoritism had shaped her sense of entitlement and dependency. Our conversations were sometimes uncomfortable, but always real. A stark contrast to the superficial interactions of the past. I never realized how much they pitted us against each other, she told me during a recent lunch. They made me believe you had it easy because you were smart and successful, while I needed their help and protection. Looking back, I can see they were using both of us in different ways. This insight from my sister, who had once been my parents' most effective tool for manipulation, represented a profound shift in our family system. The old dynamics were being questioned, the unspoken rules challenged, the established roles rejected. My social circle had expanded and deepened in ways I never could have anticipated. Sarah and her husband had become close friends, including me in family gatherings and weekend activities. My support group for adult children of emotionally abusive parents had provided both healing and lasting friendships with people who truly understood my experiences. I had even begun dating again, cautiously at first, fearful of repeating patterns of giving too much and expecting too little. James, a software architect I met through a professional conference, was patient with my careful boundaries and respectful of my journey. Our relationship was developing slowly, built on mutual respect and genuine interest rather than need or obligation. Perhaps the most significant change was my relationship with myself. The critical inner voice that had echoed David and Brenda's judgments for decades had gradually quieted, replaced by a more compassionate and realistic assessment of my strengths and weaknesses. I had learned to celebrate my accomplishments without dismissing them and to acknowledge my mistakes without defining myself by them. This self-acceptance extended to my appearance, my preferences, my choices, and my needs. I no longer felt compelled to justify my existence through constant productivity or service to others. I could rest without guilt, pursue pleasure without shame, and express anger without fear. The healing was not complete, and perhaps never would be. There were still moments of doubt, flashes of the old patterns, occasional dreams in which I was once again the desperate child seeking approval that never came. But these moments no longer defined me or determined my choices. They were echoes of the past, not dictates for the present or future. As I sat in my garden on that anniversary, I reflected on the lessons of this difficult journey. True family is defined by mutual respect and support, not by blood or obligation. The people who had stood by me, validated my experiences, and respected my boundaries had proven to be more family to me than those who shared my DNA but exploited my loyalty. Setting boundaries is not selfish, it is essential for healthy relationships. By establishing and maintaining clear limits on what I would accept and provide, I had created space for more authentic connections based on mutual care rather than exploitation. Financial independence is a form of self-protection. By securing my own resources and ensuring they were used according to my values and priorities, I had gained freedom from manipulation and control. Healing requires both separation and connection. Distancing myself from toxic relationships had been necessary, but equally important was building new, healthier relationships that demonstrated what genuine care and respect looked like. Self-worth is inherent, not earned through service or sacrifice. This was perhaps the most difficult lesson, requiring daily practice and reinforcement to counter decades of contrary messaging. Yet, it was also the most transformative, reshaping how I moved through the world and related to others. These lessons had come at a high cost. The illusion of unconditional parental love had been shattered. Family relationships were permanently altered. Years of financial resources lost. Yet, what I had gained was far more valuable: authentic self-knowledge, genuine connections, and the freedom to create a life aligned with my own values rather than others' expectations. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my garden, I felt a deep sense of peace. The journey was not over, but the hardest part was behind me. The path forward, while not always clear or easy, was mine to choose, guided by my own wisdom and surrounded by people who truly wished me well. If you've ever found yourself in a similar situation, feeling like an ATM for your family or having to make the agonizing choice to walk away to protect yourself, I want to hear from you. How did you navigate it? What advice would you give someone in my shoes, or what was your breaking point? Let me know in the comments below.